Today I'm going to take you on a journey to find the 10 most popular quilt blocks of this year. Now there will be a lot of surprises. You will find the old favorites, of course, but there are also some that are making a comeback and others that you probably never heard before. And guess what? Number 1 is not the one you're thinking. So let's see. I mentioned surprising vlogs, and I meant it because number 10 on my list and the first one I'm making, I've never made one before, and what struck me as I looked into it was just how versatile it is. The quilt block in itself isn't anything too special, but the pattern it creates when you join several of them really is something very special. I'm making the simple version that's essentially one square with a couple of half square triangles thrown in. We just create our half square triangles and sew the whole thing together. You know, there are so many variations to this quilt block. Try any of them and be amazed at how simple and how awesome this quilt block is. And here we have it, guys, the bear paw, the very simple version. This year we have so many variant quilt blocks and disappearing this and that. I love variation quilt blocks. To take a simple traditional quilt block pattern and be able to turn it into an almost infinite amount of variants of disappearing versions is absolutely magical to me. Our next quilt block is also very traditional, also making a comeback, although I do think this one never really left. It was created in the 1800s, you know, when butter churning was a thing, and this resembles equipment, let's put it like that. It is very similar to the more modern monkey wrench, but there's a clear difference in the middle section. All it takes is 2 fabrics, one white and one bright colored fabric, an 8-inch square for each. And from there we just cut bars and half square triangles. You know, this is so much fun to make because it's so basic, but the result is absolutely stunning. Look at that, guys. How cute was this? I never get tired of seeing how awesome quilt blocks look. And this, of course, was a Churn Dash quilt block. Our quilt block number 8 is one of my all-time favorites, and it's the Friendship Star. These cute quilt blocks were given to women who were about to head west on their new frontier journey. And often, those friends who gifted it to them would put their names in the middle square of the star. We need some half square triangles, of course, and you could use charm packs to make this one, all of these really. And that is actually another clear trend for this year, guys. You know, it wasn't so much a quilt block pattern, but a clear trend to use pre-cut bundles for making the quilt blocks. Jelly rolls, charm packs, fat quarters. People clearly favored quilt block patterns that were easy enough to make. How many of these quilt blocks have we made using half square triangles? That would be all of them. So yeah, a favorite one that could never not be on this list are half square triangles and quarter square triangles while we're at it. And I've paired them together because they're actually very similar to make. Half square triangles are probably the only quilt block I know that are essentially leftovers. I mean, how many quilt blocks have we made on this channel that left some HSTs behind as leftovers? Frankly, I've lost count. So yeah, one person's trash is truly another person's treasure because I love them. They're how we make pinwheels, which are only my favorite quilt block of all time. Half square triangles' popularity dates all the way back to the 1700s, so naturally they wouldn't go out of style this year. And now for our quarter square triangles, let's go ahead and get our squares. Except now we cut it diagonally, okay? This is the big difference between the HSTs and these ones. And I couldn't really find any history on this particular quilt block, so I'm guessing it's a half square triangle by product, but you would be surprised at how popular this little one got this year. And I guess I use this the most for hourglass quilt blocks, but that's not all they're good for, okay? You can totally pair them up with a triangle, for example. Let me get one. Ah, look at that. So that's number 7 and number 6 for you. Guys, and just like that, we have reached number 5. And this one really surprised me because, as it turns out, a very popular quilt block this year were pine trees. And there are a lot of ways to make pine trees these days, guys. All you need to do is Google them and find out. And you know, it being a more modern quilt block, there isn't a lot of history I can share with you guys. I do know there is a more traditional version than the one I'm making here today. You know, it involves a lot of half square triangles, but I just decided to try something different that I've also never done before. And I'm doing a really simple version today using strips that I got from my scrap pile. And I guess that leads me to the ultimate trend for this year, the one that's very obvious in my channel actually, which are scraps. Scrappy quilt blocks galore. Whether it's strips or just uneven scraps of fabric, there are so many different quilt blocks available out there. So I'm just going to need 3 strips of green fabric from my scrap pile, a brown 1-inch square, and some light background strips. I'm doing the teeny tiny version of this, okay? You can add as many strips as you like and make it bigger. Guys, how cute is this? A tiny pine tree quilt block done in a jiffy. This next one is the oldest quilt block out there. It is, of course, the 9-patch. And I guess I'm adding the 4-patch too. I mean, they were probably made at the same time. It's all a question of how many squares you want to add, right? For some reason, the 9-patch ended up being much more popular than the 4-patch, and I get it. More squares means more versatility. Variants you can do with the 9-patch are mind-blowing, some of my absolute favorites. This is probably the first quilt block all beginners make when they start quilting. And in fact, it was created to make quilts easier to do. So instead of adding 1 square at a time to what quickly became a very large, very heavy quilt, they started making clusters of 4 or 9 squares and then adding those to the bigger pieces. Clever, right? And here is our 9-patch all ready to go. Now, this is one of those quilt blocks that doesn't look like much on its own, but when you get it together with others, it makes an absolutely stunning quilt block pattern. The one thing I noticed is that there are tons of variations to this very specific pattern, but also different names depending on where you live. This is the quick version, of course, and my favorite way of making half square triangles. So we need 2 strips, one in white, another in another fabric. And we're just going to use 2 fabrics, a white one and this lovely purple polka dot fabric. With its clear religious roots, some historians say it goes back to before the Revolutionary War, while others believe it was first used during the Civil War. It was also a part of the Underground Railway Code that led thousands of slaves to freedom. I'm using white and purple for this one, but you can mix colors if you prefer, okay? And here we have it, guys. Our Jacob's Ladder is done and so much easier than it looks too. When you do it the easy way, you always get pleasantly surprised. I love it when that happens. Number 2 is what has been for many, many years the number 1 most popular quilt block out there. But once you see number 1, I think you'll understand why it changed. But this one is filled with meaning and history. It goes back to the mid-1800s, and the color of the center has its own very special meaning. Red symbolized the heart of the home. Yellow was the welcoming light by the window, and a black center when the quilt was hanging on a clothesline was to signal a stop for the Underground Railroad. My favorite part about this quilt block is the contrasts it makes. I mean, this is a stunning quilt block on its own, no matter what version of it you make, but when paired with others, once again, it is truly one of a kind. No wonder it's so popular. It's also pretty easy to make. You just keep adding strips, making sure that contrast is on point until it's done. Look at that, guys. Look at our log cabin quilt block. How cute is this? And now, guys, it's time for our number 1. And like I've told you before, I feel that the scrap craze is reaching its all-time high, and I speak from experience here. For years, I've kept my scrap pile hidden away only to throw the whole thing away once it became unmanageable. But now, all of a sudden, I'm excited to have scraps and to make scrappy, one-of-a-kind projects with them, and I'm not alone. And that is why the crazy quilt block is our number 1. Surprisingly enough, these were around in the late 1800s because people were using all kinds of leftover household scraps to make quilts. You know, they had to use what they had, and what they had wasn't always squares, right? A lot of times they didn't even have batting, just foundation fabric like the one I'm using. They were also often embellished and embroidered, which is very different from what we're used to seeing with traditional square quilt patterns. Nowadays, we tend to do much more colorful versions than what was common back then, but the spirit of the crazy quilt pattern remains, turning something discarded into something valuable and lovely. Like this one. What do you think? These are so much fun to make, guys. If you've never tried it, please do. You'll love it. Let me know if this is your list too, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye!